Hey there, welcome to Community Church. We're glad you chose to be with us today. My name is John. I'm actually at the church, excited for when we're all here again. We're not quite there yet. We are in our final part of our series, For the Win, as we try to determine what is a win in God's eyes, or what does He determine as a win for us. As we dive into this, the last two messages have been very powerful. This third one is going to be another good one. I encourage you to share these videos on social media. Maybe text them to a friend that could use this in their lives, or someone you might want to share this message with. It can be a really easy and powerful way to reach people. We have a fun video for you today to celebrate Father's Day. Hope you enjoy.
If you're a dad, you're not afraid to work hard.
Never give up.
Never compromise.
And the best dads always look for ways to get better.
I'm looking for something to energize me.
I'm looking for something to push me further.
And I'm looking for something to go with these nachos.
Dad Fuel, the energy drink designed just for dads.
So I can finish the fight.
So I can finish the race.
So I can finish mowing the lawn. And later on, I might watch some golf.
The fuel dads need to do the things dads do.
Climb the highest peak.
Go the furthest distance.
Check the scores. Read the newspaper. Give amazing relationship advice. Why are you crying? You should really talk to your mother about that.
Dad Fuel comes loaded with taurine, ginseng, and 100% of your daily recommended value of Hi Hungry, I'm Dad.
I start every morning with the 4 Ds. Devos, donuts, Dad Fuel, down blanket. Breakfast of champions, baby.
Now available in 4 bold flavors: Original Orange, Grow Model Raspberry, Grow Master Mango, and I thought I told you to take out the garbage grape.
You can't touch my passion.
You can't touch my drive.
And you definitely can't touch my thermostat. No way.
So whether you're thirsty for victory
Or just plain thirsty. No, seriously, it's empty. Can I get another one?
Dad Fuel.
Because I am fearless.
Because I am unstoppable.
Because the players on TV aren't gonna yell at themselves. Come on! Throw the ball!
Dad Fuel for the win. Hi, I'm Andy, and I'm going to cut right to it today. Jesus tells a whole bunch of stories, but one particular story that he tells in Matthew 25 is about this master who's about to go on a journey, and he meets with 3 of his servants, and he entrusts various amounts of money to them. The first guy he gives 5 bags of gold to, the second guy he gives 2 bags of gold to, and the third guy he gives 1 bag of gold to. And then he heads out on his journey, and it says that the first guy with the 5 bags immediately puts the money to work and gains 5 more bags. The second guy had 2 bags. He does a very similar thing. He puts this money to work. He gains 2 more bags. Then the third guy, instead of putting the money to work, goes and he digs a hole and hides the money. After a while, the master returns. He's coming. He wants a report. How did you do with what I gave you? And the first guy with the 5 bags says, Master, you gave me these 5 bags, you entrusted me with them, and I put them to work, and I gained 5 more. The master commends him and says, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things, and I'm going to entrust you with more things. The second guy gives a report saying, Master, you gave me these 2 bags of gold, and I put them to work, and look, I gained 2 more. The master commends him and says, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things, and I'm going to trust you with more things. Then the third guy gives a different report. He says, Master, I was afraid. I was afraid of you. I've heard all these things about you, and so I dug a hole and I buried your money. Here's the bag. The master looks at that servant and says, You wicked, lazy servant. You could have at least put this money in the bank and made interest on it. Why did you do that? Get out of here. You're fired. Okay, so what does the master commend in the story? What is the for the win moment for here? What really mattered to the master here? Yeah, you see it here. He says it twice. He says, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful. So faithfulness is the win here. So in order for us maybe to grasp what faithfulness looks like in our life, I want to maybe think about what is the opposite of faithfulness. In this particular story, what was the opposite here? You know, he commends the first two guys for faithfulness, but what was it about the third guy that was the opposite? You know, notice what the third guy did, or rather what he didn't do. He did nothing. He did nothing. You know, isn't this the kind of problem that we've been talking about for the last few weeks? You know, how Jesus, when he talked about the religious leaders of that day, you know, in Matthew 25, he says, you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You know, Jesus is saying neglect is the problem. You are doing nothing when it comes to the things that matter to God. You know, justice, you know, we talked about how justice is making things right and fair. It's seeing the oppressed around us. It's standing up for the oppressed, and it's standing with the oppressed. But in that day, the religious people, as well as today, you know, religious people often just stay quiet when it comes to things that need justice around them. You know, then Jesus says, you know, mercy matters to me. You know, mercy, this compassion and action that we defined last week, how being available, being inclusive is a win for God. And we saw this story last week of the Good Samaritan and how he went out of his way to meet the need of a guy who had a need, who showed mercy. He showed compassion and action. But we saw that the religious people in that story that Jesus told just walked on by. And so often in our lives, we just kind of do nothing. You know, we see that need, but we don't really do anything about it. So faithfulness, I want to talk about that today. What do we mean by faithfulness? I think what we could really uncover today is that there's three mantras that faithful people live by. You know, the first mantra is this: I am entrusted. You notice this in the story, don't you? I mean, notice that the faithful servants recognize this. You know, when they met the master at the end, they said, you entrusted me with this. You know, I think about in our lives that God has entrusted us with various things. I think we can simply put it as the 3 R's that God has entrusted us with, the 3 R's. First thing is resources. God has entrusted us with resources. You have strength, you have time, you have money and possessions, those resources that God has given you. And so often we make the mistake of thinking that they are ours. That this is my time, this is my strength, this is my resource, this is my money. And you notice in the story that the servants recognize this money that you gave me isn't mine, it's yours, it belongs to the master. And so we recognize that I'm entrusted with resources. You are entrusted with various resources. The second R is a role. You have a role. You have a purpose, a very specific place of influence that God has entrusted you with. Whether it's at work, whether it's in the community, whether it's among groups of people, whatever it is, you are entrusted with a role. That's something that does not belong to you, but it belongs to God. You are also entrusted with the third R is relationships. There are relationships in your life, whether it's your children, grandchildren, a brother, sister, friendships. There are relationships that God has entrusted you with for the season of life that you're in right now. And so the faithful recognize, the mantra that's so true of them is that I am entrusted. The second mantra that we see of the faithful is that they say, I am to get to work. In this particular story, the first two guys, you know, it says that they immediately got to work and they put the money to work and they gained more bags of gold. I think about the third guy in the story, though. You know, what does he do? You know, he doesn't get to work. He just digs a hole and he puts it in there. He doesn't do anything. You know, and I think about that in our lives is that so often we put off the things that we know we ought to do. You know, there are resources and roles and relationships that we have, and it's so easy for us to just kind of put them off and say, well, I'll use them later. You know, I'll give to God's cause later. I'll help that person. I'll play catch with my kids later, you know, and the faithful recognize that time is short, and so I better get to work quick. Do you notice what the master said to that third guy? He says, "You wicked, lazy servant." So many of us, myself included, are guilty of procrastinating when it comes to the resources, the things that God has entrusted us with. We're so, we put it off. And so the faithful recognize, I'm to get to work now. This time I have is short. So the mantras of the faithful are, I am entrusted and I am to get to work. And the third mantra that we see is that I am to take risks. Isn't that essentially what the first two servants did in the story? I mean, they put this money to work. They took a risk. They stepped out on a limb. And there are God-sized risks in our lives that we need to take. The third guy in the story, rather, he didn't take a risk. I mean, look what he said. He said, I am afraid. I was afraid. He was afraid of failure. And so often we allow this fear of failure to paralyze us and really hold us back from taking the risks that God is calling us to take. I like how the Message paraphrase describes the master's response to this third guy. Look what he says. It says that the master was furious. That's a terrible way to live. It's criminal to live cautiously like that. If you knew I was after the best, why did you do less than the least? The least you could have done would have been to invest the sum with the bankers, where at least I could have gotten a little interest. And then he says, and get rid of that play it safe who wouldn't go out on a limb. Throw him out into utter darkness. I don't want to be called a play it safe. And I don't think that you do either. I don't want to come to the end of this life and recognize that there was moments that I could have taken a risk, but I didn't because of fear of failure. The life of faith requires taking risks. What does the risk look like? Maybe for you, it's obeying what God has already called you to. So often we already know that next step that God wants to take, but we kind of are hesitant. We don't want to step out in faith into the uncertainty and take that next step toward God. Maybe it's obeying what God has already told you to do. Maybe for you, the risk you need to take is to get real with others, but maybe even more importantly, get real with yourself. Recognize that you don't have it all together. Recognize that there's an area of weakness in your life, and maybe getting the strength and courage to let somebody else know and saying, I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to address that issue in my life. I'm not going to settle with it. Maybe the risk you need to take is to lead those around you, those relationships that you're entrusted with. Lead them spiritually. You've just been kind of playing it safe. You've been kind of just coasting when it comes to those relationships, and you never really have used that role and that relationship you have to speak up for things, for spiritual things, to be a spiritual influence in those people's lives. Maybe it's your children, maybe it's those around you, and the risk you need to take is maybe to stand up and speak your faith in those moments, and that's pretty scary to do. Maybe the risk you need to take is just to simply trust God with your life, and with everything that you have, saying, God, this all belongs to you, and I want to trust you. Okay, so let's take a moment and recap here. The mantras. I am entrusted. Which one of the 3 R's do you need to really recognize and admit that this does not belong to you? Those resources, those maybe a role you have in life, a relationship that God has entrusted you with. Maybe it's this mantra of I need to get to work. You've been putting off using those resources and those relationships and those roles. You've been putting them off, and you need to say, I need to get with it, and I need to do what God's called me to do. And maybe it's this mantra of I just need to take a risk. I've been playing it safe. I've been operating by better safe than sorry, and I need to take a step of faith. And I need to obey. I need to trust. I need to get real. Would you pray with me? God, I know for me, and I know for a lot of us, when it comes to the end of our lives, this short time on earth, I want you to say to me, well done, good and faithful servant. God, I pray that you would help us to recognize that all we have belongs to you. It's yours. Help us not to become possessive of them, but to recognize that everything from our resources to the role we have to the relationships all belong to you. And God, I pray that you would help us to not put off what you've called us to do with what you've entrusted us with. And Lord, I pray for those of us who just need to take a risk. There's something that you're calling us to, and we need to step on out in faith. I pray that you would give each one the courage to do that. And God, may you help us to be people with God-sized faith. That would be said of us that we were faithful. We pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen.
What has God entrusted you with? What kind of risk is he asking you to take? You need to be pondering this and thinking about this, and if you're looking for help with it, I highly encourage you to go to our church website, fayette.church. Here you'll find different resources, including the next steps. You'll also find links or ways to reach maybe Pastor Andy for conversation, or just to answer some of your questions, or maybe just someone to talk to. I really want you to think about what you can take from these services and these messages, how you can apply it to your life, and then also how can the church help you. Have a great week. Thank you, fathers.